Do you worry about ransomware, data breaches, reputation damage, especially from phishing attacks, on employees working from home? The facts are, top cloud security tools have a 15% failure rate. 51% of phishing is social media based. Pixum knows because Pixum detects and stops breaches at point of click. Pixum's AI real-time solution detects actual fraud happening in a browser and stops it. Know your real security gaps. Get a phishing actualization test free at securityweekly.com/Pixum. That's PIXM. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Make sure you tune in to our next live webcast on March 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You're going to learn how to prepare Linux hosts for unexpected threats. We're going to get Linux and nerdy with the fine folks from Capsulate, Adrian, and myself. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register for that particular webcast, or visit the archive at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Here with us today is Jeff Foley, the project leader at OWASP, shedding some light on OWASP's Amass Project. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Now, the first burning question in my mind, is it Amass, Amass, Amass? It's probably not Amass, right? I mean, sometimes I am an ass, but I mean, just ask the other hosts.
Good question, because I seem to get many variations on pronunciation. It's Amass.
That's what I thought. Awesome. Now, was this your project from the beginning, or did you take it over at a certain point? Because I want to say it went through a lot of changes over the years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started as just my little project. Honestly, it was just going to stay for my use until some people encouraged me to make it open source. And then it seemed to get some attention, and eventually OWASP asked me to bring it into their organization.
Nice. And now, were the original versions written in C or some other language before? It's in Go today, is that correct?
Yeah, it was always written in Go.
Okay, gotcha. That's awesome. And what benefits come with bringing your project into OWASP?
Honestly, I just believe in their cause, and I just thought it made sense. So they described it as rounding out their portfolio, because they didn't currently have a asset detection solution. So it made sense, and I just like OWASP, and it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Nice. It's awesome. So what was when you originally came up with the concept, obviously you're trying to solve a specific problem with attack surface monitoring, management. What else do we call it, Adrian?
Yeah, monitoring, management. You put it in the notes. It's right there, so you can't forget.
Did I?
Management, monitoring, and mapping.
Mapping, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's
I
different...
think the focus here is really on that mapping piece, right?
Yeah. Was that the original challenge, Jeff?
Yeah, I would agree. Because right now, I wouldn't say that Amass has management capabilities. It does have a small amount of monitoring. Comes in the form of what we call tracking. But most of what it does is mapping. And that, or go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so you're like working for an organization, you're like, I need to understand what's exposed to the internet, basically, right? That's the itch you need to scratch.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just ran into a lot of clients originally that didn't know what exposure their assets had to the internet. So that was kind of problem number one. And then when I also brought this to larger organizations that had more mature security programs and noticed the problem only was worse in those cases, then I became really concerned. So then I also noticed that these things are changing so often that the tracking capability or the monitoring became pretty important, that you could say, well, this is what it was, this is what it is now, and here's the difference, or here's what's new between the two enumerations or times that we've checked it.
Tyler?
So give me the 101. I don't know much about the project. How does it work? Do you feed it URLs? Do you feed it IP ranges, and it goes out and just discovers your world? How does it work from an intelligence capacity?
Yeah, good question. I guess it depends on where you're starting. So I think most people using it are starting from, well, okay, let's assume we're on the red team, right? A lot of times all you have is like a domain name or something like that to begin with. So actually, I'll take this from Jason Haddix had a nice little cyclic process he suggested in his bug bounty methodology that I think he released a couple of years ago, where he said, so start with a very simple enumeration, using what you have, like the, say, 1 or 2 domain names or, whatever you've been given so far that's in scope, and see what networks these assets are being hosted on. And then you can use that information in some of the intelligence features of Amass to do horizontal domain name correlation and broaden the namespace, right? Or find the additional domain names that are registered by the same organization. Then you can include those names into the enumeration process and do a more complete vertical domain name correlation.
Yeah, it's a iterative process, right? You start out with one, then you get a more expanded list, and then you run an expanded list. And there's so many tools that are applicable in these phases. Jeff, I found Amass to be very performant and fairly thorough in a lot of those different phases. There's a lot of point tools that dig into some things deeper, but I appreciate Amass for being, written in Go, right? I think that's really where performance was probably one of your goals early on.
Yeah, and then Jeff, it actually brings it all back into some kind of file system dump or data store, or what's the return, what's the output, so that how do your users actually utilize the data?
Another good question. So, I guess if you're just, say, doing a pen test or a red team exercise or something like that, you can just get it right off standard out, or you can bring it to a text file. But if you're looking to do something a little bit more advanced with it, it stores all the findings in a graph database that during the enumeration is stored in memory, but is migrated at the end of the enumeration on disk. It can also send it to MySQL or another, popular databases, more centralized.
Got it. Yeah, that makes total sense. And then is there any potential integration to, say, like cartography or one of those other open source systems that are enumerating assets more from an internal and from a cloud-centric basis?
So the Amass project has so far focused pretty much strictly on external exposure or assets that are externally exposed, as opposed to internal assets, I guess primarily because there's already tools out there that do that pretty well.
Yeah.
And I didn't really want to be stepping on good work.
Sure.
The objective here, right, and I think to Paul's point is there's a lot of tools out there that claim to do what Amass does, but they never really did it good enough, at least for me and my clients. And it needed to be brought together so that all the benefits of these different techniques and approaches could happen in one place. And that's why we created this, but we kept it pretty focused on where the gap was.
Yeah, it's super cool that you've created it in an open source model. What's the open source license, and can people extend it? How does that work?
It's as open as we can make it. It's Apache 2.
Beautiful.
Anyone can use it and do whatever they want with it. Also, it has a scripting engine. So let's say there's something we missed, right? And I'm sure there's always going to be, something we didn't hear about or get to fast enough. People can add in additional data sources and things like that on their own, or maybe they just have their own and they have no intention of sharing it with other people. But that doesn't mean Amass can't utilize it. Similar to how Nmap has, scripting engine.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, how critical is it, and what are the advantages to integrating with the laundry list of APIs that Amass integrates with?
Your question is, how important is it to use them?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what people would like to hear, right, is, oh, it's not necessary, right? You can just use this as is out of the box and you'll be all right. But, I mean, the truth is, every one of these you add, you do get more results because no one has all the answers.
Yeah, so it's really, so it's worth the time to go pull those API keys, in other words, right?
Absolutely. It really is. I mean, there's some of these data source vendors that are doing a much better job than others. So, you know, if someone were to say, well, I can only be signing up for 5 of these or something like that, which ones do I go after? You know, I've tried not to be biased, but I definitely say to people, you know, do your homework, and some people are certainly doing better than others at this.
Sure. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, Shodan, URL scan, virus total, those are the ones that would pop out to me as the top 3, just looking at the list quickly.
Yeah, I've noticed Shodan, a lot of the ones similar to Shodan will give you completely different results. You know, I know that sometimes people will ask them not to scan their networks, you know, but they might not ask others, you know, so, you know, there's different variants of these no scan lists, I think, at each of these different vendors who do their own internet crawls.
Well, the other thing too is, so some people have been in this game a lot longer than others, right? For instance, as a obvious example, I mean, Risk IQ has been doing this for a very long time, and they have a wealth of knowledge and information available. They also, you know, are on the, say, more expensive side, or to, you know, to get full access to their service. But there's some up and comers too, who are really moving quickly in this market. So, well, for instance, I don't think there's any harm in mentioning a couple of them. You know, like Census is one of them. Security Trails. There's some really, you know, some companies that are really doing a good job at this.
Yeah.
That are easier to get access to.
So, you know, I'm curious, you know, do you mostly see pen testers, you know, people using this tool from the offensive side, or do you have a lot of blue teamers using it as well?
I think when I initially released it, it seemed the bug bounty community grabbed it pretty quick. So, you know, I think that would be considered red teaming. But
yeah, sure.
I don't think it took very long before, well, for instance, a SANS article came out pretty quick saying, you know, tools that, what do they say, red team tools that blue teamers need as well, or something like that. But I mean, they quickly realized, well, this isn't just for people that are doing offensive security assessments. I mean, everyone needs awareness, everyone needs visibility. And I think I would go a little further and say the blue team should be more on top of this, you know, arguably, than the red team. I mean, isn't the advantage of being on the blue team supposed to be that you have the home advantage?
Right.
You should know the terrain better than anyone else.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. I'd love to see this in operation in blue teams more so than red teams, because oftentimes I think the blue teams aren't performing these exercises and don't learn about assets they don't know about until the red team comes along and tells them, like, hey, you've got this, you know, web server hanging out there. Or even worse, they discover it during a breach and go, oh, I didn't know I had that hanging out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, so many times I've worked with some now large companies that, you know, I'm not going to name them, but that you would think would have their arms around this, right? Like they have some very mature security programs, but when I give them the data from Amass, what I end up hearing is something like, we didn't even know many of those things were exposed to the internet or publicly reachable. Or sometimes they just say, we didn't even know that was in production, or, you know, the asset owner, we weren't aware that they made that reachable yet. So there's a lot of what sounds to me like miscommunication, or, you know, perhaps it's that there's different like departments of the organization and they're not communicating with each other about what they've registered. and what they've deployed, which of course could be potentially solved by a good inventory, asset inventory system, but maybe they're not using one or sharing one.
Yeah. Do you think the path is? I'm always curious because earlier in my career, I would use open source as kind of a proving ground. You go, hey, we don't have attack surface monitoring, but there's this great free tool, and hey, guess what? It tells us all these cool things. Now, we can put the effort in to implement this open source tool in our environment, or maybe we go shopping for a commercial product that would give us the same or different results with different integrations into our other enterprise tools, perhaps. Jeff, where do you find organizations kind of on the path? Do you find they're using it as a proving ground, maybe keeping with the open source, or do you find that it's kind of a stepping stone to get them to a commercial solution?
With Amass, I assume you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think so far what I hear is there's people on security teams that are using this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's... So on the red team, I get people coming to me pretty frequently saying, our team is officially switching to Amass as our asset detection tool, and the whole team's going to be using it.
Mm-hmm.
So in those cases, they've decided to switch, right? On the blue team, I feel like it's a lot of times more like threat hunters and incident responders or vulnerability management personnel who are deciding to use it to get better visibility or discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that they're actually going through the trouble, say, of getting the whole security program to adopt it, say.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good call to action to the enterprise, blue teams out there to implement this process, right? Because I think, Adrian and I have been testing products, spoiler alert, in this space for quite a few weeks now. And it's really an eye-opening experience and something that I think Adrian and I both want to see as table stakes for blue teams to be able to understand their attack surface on an ongoing basis. Not, Jeff,
Right.
largely what you're describing is, red team and blue team kind of using this as a one-off thing and not implementing as part of their VM process, I think is likely where it should fit, maybe.
Yeah, like a vulnerability engineering. If they're breaking it up that much, but it would make sense to put it there. And, if I could add to what you said, I think part of the problem might be that there's already tools that a lot of these companies are investing in that claim to provide discovery, but they don't, no one is saying, oh, by the way, though, discovery is not a on or off capability. There's a range of how effective discovery is, and there's trade-offs. So I think people are buying these things and saying, oh, we already have discovery. We don't have to worry about that. And
yeah.
Right.
we don't have to improve that, or perhaps have several discovery technologies in place so that we're getting the whole picture, a better, clearer picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I can think of a few products in particular where, they're heavily adopted or heavily in use. And because they claim to do this already, I think people just move on to the next priority.
Right, not realizing they have the gaps, Adrian.
Yeah, I think one of the key problems that the attack surface monitoring is trying to solve, that both the discovery and the monitoring piece. So a couple different things here. The discovery piece, like you're saying, like most people think of discovery as, I'm going to scan these same assets over and over and over again. The external vulnerability management piece. But that process is only as useful as the inputs that you give it. I used to work with a bunch of customers, just making sure that I had a consulting firm, and one of the things we do is make sure that what they already had was configured correctly. In one particular case, I remember a customer was scanning their websites by domain, and 13 out of the 14 websites were missing the M on .com. But because one of them was correct, they would get results, and that would lead them to think everything was working, when in reality, they're only scanning one of the 14 sites. And what happens when somebody sets up a 15th site or a 16th site?
Mm-hmm.
That process is not going to discover those and automatically add them to that scan. So that I think that's one of the key problems that this space is looking to solve, is to to discover that new stuff. Even if you're scanning by IP ranges that you own, if some developer goes out there and throws something up in DigitalOcean or something like that, you're not going to scan it. You're not even going to know it's there. But if they get DNS assigned to it or something like that, at least you have a path to figuring that out.
Yeah, and so two things you just mentioned make me think of some pretty important points. One being, so when you're using these pretty typical tools for vulnerability management, they also don't exactly make it easy to import discovery information from other sources. It's not impossible, but it's, I think it's safe to say that they're encouraging you to do it with their solution, with only support for a few. I mean, what I've seen in the past is they support using data sources to feed their own discovery techniques, but they don't really say, if you have your own discovery technique, just integrate it here. Because I've been on teams trying to help them bring Amass into their existing infrastructure for vulnerability management, and it's not a smooth process for that reason. And then you just brought up cloud infrastructure, right, or off-prem. So that's almost a whole nother can of worms, right? Or a growing problem, or it's in its infancy, I would say, because there's a lot of new solutions coming out. It's kind of changing. It feels like day by day, but I think we're going to see a lot of improvements in that area pretty soon.
Right. I mean, the average startup in the last 10 years doesn't have anything that's on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
It's all 100% off-prem, from day one for a lot of these companies. So yeah, that's a big one for them.
Yeah, and I mean, when you have assets that are just containers, right, and they don't necessarily have DNS names, right? It's a little bit of a different world, but they still need to be able to find these and monitor these assets as well.
Yeah,
but it's harder right now to have visibility in the cloud.
Yeah, and I think the real trick here is, once you've discovered this stuff, building it into a repeatable process, and ensuring that once you set up something like Amass, that it doesn't get forgotten about, and it's got to be a regular process where. And I'm looking at some of the documentation here, and it looks like it's pretty easy to script this into something where, you would get emailed, or you would see something and something would pop up in Slack when something new shows up. You talked about the track feature, which basically looks like the ability to do a diff between the last scan and the current one, to tell you about new stuff, which is basically all you need to then pipe that into, something else that opens up tickets in Jira, or sends an email or a Slack message.
Yeah, and you can tell it to look back, I'll just say X number of events, or in this case, enumerations. And then there's already this nice tool that someone released, I want to say, well, probably in the last couple of months, where you can wrap the Amass track feature and then have it send messages using like webhooks only when new assets have been discovered.
Mm-hmm.
That way you could just keep running this, continuously if you wanted to, and just get your Slack message or something like that when something new pops up.
It's awesome. Jeff, I see you've got 34 contributors on GitHub. Are you looking for more contributors? Are you looking for specific contributions, or what can the community do to help you?
So I've always welcomed contributors. I've kind of had this attitude, like, if you want to help, then, we would like you to be able to help. We have a a good number of testers already.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we need a lot more testers. And, maybe that comes from the fact that, like I said, the bug bounty community seems pretty fond of this tool. So I think that, them being already familiar with testing, we've kind of been lucky enough to have some really great manual testers. But we could use some more Go programmers. And honestly, someone to maybe just help with documentation, looking at this from the point of view of someone who's never touched it before, and just give us some ideas about how we could add clarity to the existing documentation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the call to action to folks that want to get involved. Maybe you're not a experienced Go programmer, but you can write some documentation, and that's your foot in the door to beef up your experience to get into cybersecurity. So yeah, good call to action. Awesome. Well, you can find Amass on the GitHub page. As Jeff said, it's an OWASP project. Jeff, thank you very much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly and telling us all about it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
With that, we will do the Enterprise Security News coming up next. Stay tuned.